Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. I'm Gemma Creagh and I'm chatting with Ballywalter director Prasanna Puwanarajah. So thank you so much for chatting with us.
Well, thank you so much for talking about the film with me. It's really lovely to have conversations about it after a 7-year process of making it. It's nice for it to be emerging into the world.
7 years. Okay, well, I'm definitely digging into that. It does exactly what I love, and is that it's kind of pain with comedy. They're my two favorite things.
All of life
cathartic.
All of life is here, pain and comedy. Yeah.
So you were saying 7 years. So one of the things I'm really interested is to hear about the development process. What gets you working with Stacey Gregg? What gets you over this side of the pond?
Yeah, so I met Stacey over 10 years ago. We did a Channel 4 new writing strand called Coming Up. And we were basically paired together on that as writer and director. And I think they basically put us together because we worked together well in this kind of workshopping thing. We made a silly and quite fun little 3-minute film together on that scheme. But also they were quite interested in our shared post-conflict heritages. My family of Sri Lankan Tamil, Stacey is from East Belfast. So there's a kind of, there was a sort of hotline that we immediately had into specifically how people hide in humour, I think, and how they hide deep trauma and inherited trauma through humour. Sri Lankan Tamil people are very, very funny, and it's a very funny, I don't know what it is about it linguistically or syntactically, but it's a very funny language. And it's definitely an energy that I recognised in Belfast when I started going there. And I could kind of understand the layers of hiding, and humour being a kind of like shield, you know, a foot in front of your face at all times. This kind of like force field, I guess, this interface space. So Stacey and I were immediately kind of then, after we'd done that film, we started working together on some theatre projects. We were working on some television pitches and things. I directed her as a performer in a theatre show at the Bush in East Anglia. And worked with her and helped her a bit with some of her live artwork. So we've had a like very multi-faced creative collaboration. And then we started talking about feature film and longer form storytelling, authored, I guess, by her, but kind of co-conceived in terms of like our shared energy, which is really about that kind of like what's behind deadpan social realist humor. What's the thing underneath it, you know? And Stacey went away and wrote this script and was just like, I think she'd just written a theatre show that had been on at the Abbey and was sort of like emerging from that and was looking at subsequent kind of creative journeys. And this just sort of happened, I think, over 2 weeks. We just sort of laid it down. And actually, in terms of the kind of script, it's just not a million miles away from that. There are some aspects of it that, you know, some of the stuff around a comedy course was material improvised with those incredible actors in that scene. But by and large, the stuff between Shane and Eileen, who are the two protagonists, is very much like what that very first draft was. I guess start of our working relationship together. But then, yeah, like I say, that was sort of 7 years ago. Wow. And we developed that script with Northern Ireland Screen and with our producer, James Bierman, and then latterly our second producer, Nick Bauer. And that work involved development of the script, honing it, I guess, working out its primary concerns and sharpening those. And you know, a few recce's to the Ards Peninsula, and I was immediately kind of thinking about how to shoot the film and what the visual reality of it was and the sonic reality of it. So I started very early on kind of going there whenever I could and driving the peninsula a lot. So I had a kind of spatial map in my head of the primary road journey in the film between Belfast and Ballywalter that they undertake. Key locations, key sort of places, down to, you know, that hill on that bend of the road would be a good place to put a camera on sticks to get a shot like this. And, you know, because I think I knew that however we ended up making the film was always going to be, I guess, a practical challenge, because it's a complicated film. It's a secretly complicated film. It's partly on the road, it's partly in cars, it's also kind of, you know, big set pieces and large scenes with lots of cast and challenging environments to shoot in, coastal environments, A roads, you know. So we wanted to kind of cherish that scale and for it to feel like not, you know, as one of our someone at the BFI asked us in our pitch, you know, how do you stop this just being the inside of a Toyota Prius? It was really important that it wasn't, and it was important that it wasn't another grey film from these islands, you know, that somewhere in its kind of social realist makeup was colour and life trying to happen, you know, that weirdly the characters were not able to access or something, you know. Yeah, and then it was a case of, you know, the near endless search for finance, and you know, we're so grateful to our partners at the BFI, Screen Ireland and Northern Ireland Screen for not only coming on board the film but not disembarking it like prematurely, because it took us so long. And it actually was just in the pandemic, I think, when, you know, a lot of projects really fell apart at the start of the pandemic. And I think there was a sort of sense that, you know, we could do a film about two people in a car. I think a lot of our stakeholders had sort of forgotten that it also had like 35 other people in it. loads of
comedy club scenes.
Yeah, comedy club scene. Loads of ways to get COVID on that shoot, you know, but nobody did. We had one positive test out of 650 or something in 5 weeks of shooting in the pre-vaccine pandemic in Northern Ireland.
Very lucky. Oh my God.
Very, very lucky, and actually also just very, you know, very hard work doing that, and in a huge kind of commitment from the crew and the cast to protect each other, really, just physically, just medically speaking, not anything to do with protecting the sanctity of the film or anything like that. Literally, like before
but
the vaccine.
Sort of is, because one person goes down, one tree fells, a lot of the forest is down.
Yeah, it ends up being that, but it also ends up being about, like, you know, trying to protect jobs, and, you know, 100 jobs in the pandemic around Christmas time is really no joke. And so people were amazing, and at our end we tested rigorously, and at considerable expense, actually, for a very, very small production like ours. We essentially spent our entire contingency budget on COVID, which is something that is just not heard of, you know, particularly in small scale independent filmmaking. Those contingencies are so vital to get you over the line, and we just didn't have anything. So it was all the challenges of location indie filmmaking. It was my first film, so all of those challenges as well, plus a pandemic, plus, you know, Brexit, which happened in the middle of our shoots. So actors who were going to be coming up from Ireland were suddenly kind of not able to, because of the collision of Brexit and the pandemic, suddenly meaning that COVID rules between the two nations were no longer compatible, because they were no longer part of a bigger European COVID sort of direction of travel. So it was just a bewilderingly complex thing to do. But, you know, we've we've I think we've managed to hide the complexities of the filmmaking, and it's a lovely compliment that the film receives, that it feels quite simple, I think, which is good.
And that it speaks to people. That I think that is one of the best compliments that you can get. And definitely thematically, it doesn't sit into the, classic British working class film. Like, you can really get the Irishness of it, because it's there's such a feeling of darkness to it. And I'm like, like that kind of processing of pain with humor, and you can really get that sense for it, rather than, instead of the like, we'll all band together and it'll be brilliant, like so many of the, like the Full Monty, all those things are about overcoming
Yeah.
obstacles, and this is more about like a kind of pained internal journey and internal obstacles. So it's sort of a really wonderful it's probably a very good time to have that explored post pandemic, when a lot of people are working through their own issues. And, I think especially at that time, so many people were faced with the things maybe they were avoiding in their day-to-day lives, because you just had to sit at home. How much of that would have played into the way that you shot it, or would it have been like an unconscious thing that you and Stacey would work together, get it across the line, and it just so happened to work out that way?
Well, I was just very aware from the start, I think, of making an Irish film, I think. And I think it's all of the things that you've described as kind of ways in which films from this island might inflect Britishly or Irishly.
Yeah.
While sharing a certain DNA. And how actually profound those little inflections end up being. Like, the notion of something feeling Irish is really quite subtle, I think. And I don't know what it is, but I kind of understand that more the older I get than I do what Britishness is. I think it's to do with a sort of flipping of the siege mentality or something. There's something about Ireland that is spiritually rising, I think, or trying, or reaching, or something. And something about Britain that is really struggling and in a tailspin about how to recover from doom, to use that word that you've described, which is sort of what the pandemic was. And I think, like, we've lost a shared national story in Britain. I don't think we have one anymore. But it doesn't really matter where you come from in the island of Ireland. There is a story that is shared. There's a space that is collectively inhabited, and that space, as you say, contains a huge amount of trauma, but also a huge amount of joy and a huge amount of spirit and verve and life and wit and narrative and community and crack, basically. And so, I think that's a kind of, in some ways, it's a 10-year embedding in a space that I really understand as being, like fundamentally post-colonial, which is absolutely the landscape of my upbringing, even though I grew up in the south of England because of my kind of heritage, I guess. So it's a kind of like concurrently running understanding, I guess, or an instinctive understanding of what an Irish film is for me. And it's probably closer to me than what a British film might be, I guess, just because of that. And it's a very deep rooted like thing. So I get that a lot, and it's a really wonderful compliment. But that people kind of go, you're sort of weirdly more Irish than the Irish. I'm like, yeah, great. I would absolutely take that. I think that's a really wonderful thing. Having spent most of my childhood basically being told to, F off back to wherever, it's quite nice to be in a space where actually people are going, oh no, actually you're very much like us.
Yeah, you're home now.
Yeah, yeah.
We all have intergenerational trauma going back, like,
Yeah,
so many generations.
Completely. And it's and so that strand in the film, what you inherit, the kind of like cascading, it's sort of like an anvil falling down mine shaft. The way that trauma just like careers through generations, like heavily but rapidly and silently, is something that I'm only really coming to terms with, how that is a part of a South Asian British life, in very, very different ways, but fundamentally like rhythmically related ways to what it's like to be a person from the island of Ireland in these islands, So yeah, I mean, Stacey and I kind of never really spoke about that when we were piecing together the film, but it was always the thing that I guess had brought us together. That she always remarked on, I think, that the notion of where our understanding meets, and it's not really in an intellectual space, it's in a kind of spirit space or sort of instinct space or something. So actually it wasn't really about, and this is the most long-winded answer ever.
Oh no, I love it. This is brilliant. Because it's even though it's long, it's very focused and very and clear.
No, I think like there's that it was never about having to create an architecture of Northern Irishness, essentially. Like that fundamentally that was in Stacey's script. It was in our relationship as collaborators, and it was very much in my instincts around how to make the film. And that's about, visually what it would need in order to kind of release its spirit, and musically, even in terms of like our composer, but also like the kind of what the kind of, I guess, musical DNA of the film is. All of those things they felt like instinctive choices rather than impositional choices, I guess, But it was interesting, like every kind of every time we went out to finance the film, there really was this kind of like sort of eyebrow going up, going, why are you making an Irish film? In a way that you'd never ask a white director from England. There's sort of like a sense that I should probably be making something about arranged marriages or whatever. But like I say, the Irish story and the South Asian story are sort of the same story.
Yeah, that's it. And sure, no one questions the white middle class man going over and doing anything anywhere. Like he just gets a pass,
yeah,
and like an I'm allowed to be here pass wherever they go, even when they shouldn't. They specifically shouldn't be telling certain stories.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting though, because I think you never quite know what a person's connection point with the story is. Yeah. And it is always worth interrogating. But I don't think that interrogation has really happened until recently. And I think it's also just about a representational thing, isn't it? Like if you've got people sitting in thrones of storytelling, and actually there are people not able to sit down, it may be that it's not authenticity necessarily that you lose, but you lose richness and detail and honesty and the kind of secret spaces of lived experience, I think. So so in a way, I mean, my cinematographer, Ballywalter, Federico Cesca, is South American, he's Argentinian, lives in Slovakia, studied in New York and Santiago, I think. He left a very, very small baby and his wife to come and shoot this film in the pandemic, and then eventually they came over to visit on the understanding that they wouldn't be able to fly back for Christmas because of Brexit and COVID. And again, his sort of space of outsiderness, but his interior understanding of aloneness at the end of relationships and so on. Like there's sometimes a really interesting thing that comes from the slightly adjacent view, provided that it's located somewhere in the bedrock. So it's a challenging thing, that thing about like who's allowed to tell what story, I think.
And if you can authentically get into it somehow, like it doesn't, like there has to be some kind of way of Like, because you feel it, and anything you watch or read or do, you can feel it if there's no hint of
Mm.
truth behind the emotion of it. I think
Yeah,
at a certain point.
totally. And but also, like, I think, that's the point of story. Like, stories is it's about connecting to another human rather than, and that is sort of is about the authorship, isn't it? And I guess, like, sometimes you want a story to just, you just want to skip along the surface of a thing, and that's fine too. But I think with something like Ballywalter, where it's all about what's under the surface, I think it would have been so easy for it to just be, I guess, like, quite light, and just to look at that sort of surface space. And so, yeah, I mean, I hope that, like, the my relative distance from that place and weird connection and closeness to it, somewhere in that tension, is the energy of the film.
When pain is observed, it often is very angry. And I think when people have female characters, they're often afraid to give them that rage underneath the pain. But I'm like, but I like an angry female protagonist, because I feel like that's much more authentic to my lived experience and that of people around me. But it's not something that always translates
Yeah,
onto screen.
yeah. And I guess it's also about what the context of that rage is, and what the male energy around it is. Like, does it have its space to grow? It was so interesting when we cut the film. It just, for ages, we didn't quite get to her in the right way in the first 10 minutes. And so we just completely recut the opening.
Wow. What did it look like in the different
Well,
variations of it?
it used to begin with a car crash that she drives away from. And it just made it really hard to kind of get into her as a person, to try and want to understand. I think, well, this is the kind of feeling that people that we tested the film on early on just found it challenging in a way that I just simply don't believe they would have if the protagonist was male. I think people would have been like, "Ooh, Travis Bickle, ooh, interesting." Ooh. And I was not really prepared to run the risk. I don't know. I was like, we'll get them in the end, but I don't want to make it easy for them to slip out the side door in the first 5 minutes, you know. And that doesn't mean that we then were like, okay, Rose is around the door at the start. Like, it's a near wordless first 6 minutes of the film. It's a kind of, I sort of love it, actually. It's like a really specific kind of, almost like a poem of a life in your 20s. The very, very first opening sort of sequences. And I worked really carefully with our composer, who is a musician from Dublin called Niall Lawler, NC Lawler. He's a busker from Grafton Street. That's when I sort of met him. With a kind of amazing, like, Irish / Texan bluegrass guitar heritage. We were sort of like looking at it, and he sort of, most of the process was conducted in advance of the shoot, and on WhatsApp. Actually, we just shared ideas and pictures and thoughts, and he would just make these little WhatsApp clips of him playing his guitar. And quite a lot of the film is actually just scored directly from my WhatsApp. And the bits that aren't, we recorded over a couple of days in Dublin, in Dunleary. And that opening section, he was sort of so keen to just, in his phrase, push it sideways and just help it to be a bit strange and funny and weird. And, and so all of those things were about kind of like, I guess, just shifting, refracting, re-refracting the beginning of a protagonist's journey, so that it never felt like it was either just a happy person or a sad person or a angry person, but that it was a person who was all of those things at once, on on the skids a bit, you know. So yeah, I think you've got to really look after your angry protagonists. You've got to really treat them with great care so that rage is like absolutely deployed, but deployed kind of with clarity, I guess, and context. So yeah, and I'm delighted actually the film has found a really clear audience among women really in their teens and 20s and early 30s, which is, I think, a real testament to Shauna as well and her ability to connect and open up as a sort of performer. She is a true cinema performer, I would say. And it's really interesting watching the film Big. It's an interesting thing to kind of consider what makes any film cinematic. And it could be anything from like the need to share it with other people, or, you know, the kind of visible scale or the like secrecy of it that requires holding of attention away from phones and things. But for this, it's about watching two people crack each other open at scale, but in small ways. And that really is, in the particular case of Shauna, like her gift to her audience and that audience, which is that, you know, that kind of Gen Z audience, I suppose, that I guess increasingly feels like less of the world is meant for them. You know.
Yeah, it is. It's so frustrating, and you can hear those sentiments. So it is lovely in a post-COVID world to have that, to have like your interesting female character, flawed, portrayed on screen. And again, like, and about the connection, about moving back to life. Like, it just seems like a really wonderful, almost fortuitous time. I'm sure you weren't feeling that when everything was pushed back, but it seems like it's a sort of healing time for this type of film.
It really, I mean, honestly, like the need for stories and artworks and ways of telling human-sized stories about people who are just making a journey back from aloneness and isolation. You're totally right, has just become the central creative. For me, it's just like at the center of everything. I think people have been so alone together for the last few years, like the kind of isolation in the paradox of lockdown with other people, the sense of a shrinking world, the sense of like the future just vanishing, you know, living in a kind of grim present. Just need to know that like round the corner is a stranger who just might turn it around for you, and not in a big way, but just like might see something in you or see something in your future without even realizing that they're doing it. And you might do the same for them, and you might walk with them for a few months in your life, and that might be it, but it might be enough. Like, it's a film, it really is just about that. And I think post-pandemic, it's like everyone needs that.
That's so lovely. I've about 1,000 questions that I won't ask you because I know we're really short on time, but I do want to say this is your first feature as one of the interesting things is you were a doctor before. That it was like, okay, now you've gone to like the spiritual healing end of things, which is lovely. But you've kind of come at this from different angles as a performer. You've written yourself, you're you know, like, you really kind of understand all the hats that are in the space. As a director, do you feel, you know, a project of this scale, and obviously that has been such an uphill battle for so long, like, what is it that you've taken away from that journey yourself as a creative?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. I think there's a sort of solo attritional quality to filmmaking, which until you felt it, I don't think you ever quite understand what that is. And it can really feel like, I guess, like no one's ever asked you to do anything creative. You know what I mean? It's like it's an act of personal like need or you know.
But it's also a service.
It is, but I kind of find it hard to get to the place where I see it as that, because I don't believe that I necessarily am the person to provide that service, if you know what I mean. What I do believe is that, you know, there's only ever been one of any of us, and so we all kind of have that requirement to get out there and be in the world and like connect, I suppose. But I think the real challenge is the kind of, you know, is holding on, I suppose, for that amount of time with your collaborators, and everyone's holding on, you know, Stacey, James, Nick, Patrick, Shauna, and our incredible, like everyone just holding on as the film just kind of went through its various sort of phases of silence and visibility. Because, you know, the truth is you never know whether anyone's going to see a film that you make, whether they ever can, you know. And I don't think anything quite prepares you for how dark that can feel, you know, particularly when you think that actually there is value in it and there is connection in it. And then you start to see that connection happening when you take it round the festival circuit. And for this film, big audiences turning up, you know, 350 people in Belfast at the premiere. The film won an audience award in Washington, DC. You start to see the way that it connects, you know, and then whole new realms of kind of fear emerge. Like, will we be able to get it out into the world, or will it sort of will it have a potential that was sort of untapped in terms of, as you say, you know, reaching people? And so it's a sort of gift that keeps on giving.
The stress of waiting and finding out.
It's an unbelievably challenging, attritional thing. And, you know, that's the real lesson, I think, for me, is that, you know, in order to see the course, you've got to absolutely know why you're making something, which circles all the way back around to what we were talking about at the start, which is like, what's the fundamental plug-in of a piece of material to use. So the real take home for me is that I nowadays spend quite a lot of my time trying to work out why something doesn't connect with me, rather than trying to persuade myself that it does, you know. And people don't ask me to direct things very often at all, but when they do, it's sort of so often the case that I kind of go, I don't really think I'm the person for that, or I can't really find a way into that. I don't really know why that would be me, you know. I mean, people do ask a lot. They sort of go like, you know, you just learn so much making a film. And it's interesting how much of that was actually away from the making of the film, if that makes sense. The stuff that I've really learned about myself and about it as a process that is sort of nothing to do with, you know, the intricacies of post-production or the actual building of a thing on set, you know.
Then what would it be, kind of more things in terms of character, like internal strength and patience? Like, obviously, is that it after 7 years?
Yeah. And you go, right, okay, we're all here, and what was that? You know, and where I'm trying to understand, like, whether you've got a fundamental need to put stories out there, and if so, what are those needs and what are those points of connection with the world? And I guess from that you come to some sort of understanding about what each project is as a particular diary entry in your life, you know. It's weird because with films, because they take so long to make, like, you journey into new eras of your life as you're doing. You become essentially a different person. I think biologically, I think all of our atoms have recycled every 7 years.
Wow. So you are literally a completely entirely different person.
Completely different physical human. Plus, 7 years older, through a pandemic, you know.
Feature under your belt as well, like part of that process of actually going. It's a very different type of career path.
It is, although I think like I've not really, there's no plan kind of thing. I mean, it's one of my favorite lines in the film when Shane and Eileen are talking at Grey Abbey. And he just says, there's no plan. Like, there's never really a plan. And there sort of isn't. I don't really have a kind of scheme here. That like when you say like you've got a feature under your belt, it was sort of. I don't think it was really a case necessarily that if I hadn't directed this film, I would have directed something. I might have done, but there wasn't like an abstract thing about like I'm going to make a film now. It was like, here's the thing that I really get, and here's a person who I really understand who's written it. So yeah, I don't know.
That's wonderful, actually. And it's such an organic, authentic way to connect with material. And then just one last thing is, if there was something that now you'd feel the urge to tell, would there be like another type of a story that you'd go, okay, I've dealt with this type of situation, I've dealt with these type of characters, now I want, being at a different stage, to tell something focused on community, or so, like, like, what do you feel now that you've kind of changed as a person and as a creative would be the next stage that you'd like to get into?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually I would like to get into one of the things that's been so fascinating to look at in this film is the notion of intergenerational trauma, heritage fracture, second generation narratives, I guess. And so I think the thing that I'm most interested in at the moment is actually stories specifically from my heritage space. So, Sri Lanka and the civil conflict being one of the most silent, underreported spaces, and yet is a place that people honeymoon to. It's a very unusual island in that way. No one was going to Belfast in the 80s going, but it's really great spa vibes, whereas like Sri Lanka is absolutely that. So there's
the most bombed hotel in Europe, like that's their thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, do you know what I mean? It's a challenge on TripAdvisor, a stat like that. Whereas people really have been going back to Sri Lanka and kind of going, oh no, we've not been to the north, though. It's sort of still a bit, and so I think I'm interested in the tacit, I guess, blindsiding or looking away, I guess, like how it's the other side of the curtain, maybe, from how do people who are the recipients and the inheritors of trauma navigate the world, which is maybe what Ballywalter is, to how do outsiders from that space ignore it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean,
that's one for the development fund.
It's one for the development fund. I mean, as you can probably tell, they'll be battering down the door to finance that. But
I haven't seen it, so.
Well, let's see. Watch this space.
Brilliant, but it's like I just like such a beautiful film. There's such a warm cast. The content is beautiful.
22nd of September. Cinema release, the whole of the island of Ireland and the island of GB on the same day. I would really say to people like it catch it at the cinema, and if you're a person in your 50s, find a person in your 20s and take them along, and very much vice versa.
Yeah, that's lovely. So you have those two generations represented in like, but I kind of think that's so important as well to kind of like, again, that level of healing and connection after how many years, like you can kind of feel it in the air still. It's not settled.
No, it's not. So with a bit of luck, this is a bit of balm
Yeah,
people.
a bit of Sudocrem for the soul. That's it.
Yeah.
That can be our poster quote.
Yes, exactly.
Film
Yeah.
Ireland, Sudocrem for the
Yes,
soul.
the weirdest
most abstract one yet.
advertising cover. Yeah, yeah. Sponsorship deal ever.
But wonderful. But thank you so much.
Well, thanks very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Mel.
Bye. Bye.